In this segment, Dr. and Mrs. Willke show and tell the beautiful story of how each of us developed in our mother's womb. They then answer major pro-abortion arguments. Physician and nurse, authors, lecturers, and radio personalities, they are internationally known experts in human sexuality. Now, Dr. and Mrs. Willke.
Who or what is the little passenger growing inside of the mother's womb? Is this a human life? Or when does this become a human life? And if so, should the law protect this life? Those are the basic questions of the abortion dilemma facing this nation at the end of the 20th century. Probably the most controversial social issue out there at this time of history. Well, let's ask the first question first. Is this human life? How do we answer it? Well, rather simply, you can go to any college library in the world and pull that biology book, the embryology book, off of the shelf and open it up. Therein lie the facts of scientific knowledge. Let's go that route first. Let's explore what science tells us about this little passenger. Then maybe we'll be able to grapple with that second question.
Let's look at little premature babies first. This little girl, Kelly Thorman, born 21 weeks into her mother's 40-week pregnancy, is pictured here weighing 1 pound 3 weeks after delivery. That's the nurse's wedding ring on her forearm. It gives you an idea of how tiny those little ones are. And here's another little one, Kenya King. She was born to weigh just 1 pound and 3 ounces. She dropped down to 13 ounces, and here she is going home from the hospital with her mother weighing 4.5 pounds, a perfectly healthy, normal little baby.
Viability, the ability of a child to survive outside of the womb if born. When Barbara and I were being professionally trained after World War II, viability was around 30 weeks. Then it dropped. It was down around the mid-20s. Today, as you've seen, here are 2 little girls who've survived at 21. What is viability? Viability, the ability to survive. Does that measure whether they're human or not, whether they should be protected or not? No. Viability is a measure of the sophistication of the external life support systems around the baby. It does not measure the humanness of the baby himself or herself.
And let's look at a little one now in the womb. This little one, same age, 4.5 months or 18 weeks after conception. This little one's life could be taken in many states today. Why? Simply because of where he lives. He still lives within the womb.
Let's drop 2 more weeks. 16 weeks along. Does this look like a baby? Well, I rather think so. No different from the 18-weeker you just saw.
And here's a little one at 14 weeks development. Should his life be protected? Is he a member of our human family?
13 weeks.
At 13 weeks, we have the little baby, so small you could hold him in the palm of his hand, and yet how perfectly formed he is already.
Let's drop down to 11. This little fella still in the womb, the front of it's been cut away. What are we looking at? A tiny little baby, still in the bag of waters, still alive at this point, still sucking his thumb. What do we know about the baby at this age? Well, we're about 1/3 of the way through pregnancy, about 3 months have elapsed. We know now that the baby begins to breathe. Fluid, of course, and slowly. But each of us breathed for 6 months inside the womb to prepare our lungs, muscles, and everything for the job of breathing air after we came out. At the end of 3 months, the little one swallows, digests nutrients from the fluid swallowed, urinates, tiny little liquid bowel movements. In the 4th month, the baby begins to sleep and to wake. In the 4th month, the baby begins to hear. And we could go on, but basically, try and remember. 1/3 of the way through pregnancy, what have we got? We've got a tiny little child whose body is completely formed, right down to fingerprints, and all organ systems function. They're not all mature yet. That little boy's sex organs won't be mature for 15 more years, but they're all there, they're all functioning. End of 3 months.
Move down to 10 weeks. Here we have the tiny little feet from a developing baby. They're as completely formed as yours or mine, and yet how tiny they are.
Look at the actual size here on my lapel. When each of us was 10 weeks old, we were so tiny that we could have stood on our daddy's little fingernail. And yet our bodies were so perfectly formed that we had fingerprints.
And the 8-week baby, much smaller now, and yet already, what can he do? He can grasp an instrument and hang on if you could put one inside. He's swimming freely in the amniotic fluid with a natural swimmer's stroke. We know very much more now about the unborn child than we ever did before because of the advent of sonograms.
Ultrasound movies have been a tremendous advance to everyone. Many of you watching today have gone with your wife, your sister-in-law, whoever, and seen some of these movies at that time. Now let's take 8 weeks. Let's lay an instrument in the palm of this little one's hand. He'll grab it and hang on just like a newborn baby. But if you pull the instrument away and then prick him in the palm, he'll pull his hand away, just like a newborn baby.
And at that stage, he's probably this size or even tinier, and yet a little human baby. He can already do many, many things, as we've said. To summarize, at 8 weeks, the little baby's heart is beating, he has brain waves, fingerprints, and feels pain. And the little baby at 7 weeks, the tiny little foot alongside of a lead pencil, gives you an idea of just how perfectly made the little baby is so young.
1 week younger, here is the hand and forearm of a baby 6 weeks old lying on the back of a dime.
And this remarkable photo of a baby also 6 weeks after conception is from a tubal pregnancy.
Now, we can also hear this little one's heart at this stage of the game. This is an ultrasonic stethoscope that most of us doctors have in our offices now. They're not terribly expensive. Little transistorized thing. What you do is put this over the lower abdomen of the pregnant woman, and when you get right above that tiny little heart, the ultrasound waves are reflected, and then they're broadcast through this. Let's listen to the heartbeat of a baby 6 weeks and 5 days old. Let's listen.
The interesting thing about this is that this little baby here already can, there's first movement. If you tickle a little nose, he can already pull his head away.
If you take a look, you can count 5 little fingers and toes on each hand. You know, the thing I find most intriguing about a 6 weeks old baby is that now we have demonstrable human brain waves as measured on the electroencephalogram. I think we're all aware of talking about brain death. Let's take a tragic accident with a young man and a cycle accident, head injury, and brain death. And we say, well, he's dead. We can take his yet beating heart for transplant. How do we know he's dead? Well, we have a variety of measurements, but ultimately the final one is absence of brain waves throughout the entire brain for a certain period of time. Okay? We agree worldwide, whether we're clergymen, doctors, whoever, that when brain waves are finally gone, this person is dead. Okay? Let's go down to the beginning of life. When can we measure brain waves on the developing baby? Only 40 days after conception. Isn't it interesting that the same scientists who are perfectly willing to use the ending of brain waves to measure the ending of human life are completely unwilling to use the beginning of the same brain waves to measure the beginning of human life? Actually, human life begins before that.
Here's a little one at 5 weeks. That's the quarter for size to show you how tiny he is and yet how perfectly his little body is being formed already.
And yet, let's back a little earlier. 18 days. She's only 4 days overdue for her first period. The heart is beginning to beat already. Let's drop to 10 days. This little one attached 3 days earlier and now is sending a chemical hormonal message out into the mother's body, telling her body not to menstruate. It isn't the woman who turns off her period. It's this new little one inside of her. At 1 week of life, this tiny one attached to the nutrient lining of her womb. And as we back up to day 1, that little embryonic baby was floating freely down her tube, and we get back to day 1, for that is when human life begins.
When sperm joins ovum, a unique new individual is created, one that's never existed before, one that never again will exist. The scientific fact is this: each of us once was a single cell, and contained within that cell is everything we are today. How tall we'll be, what size shoe we wear, whether we'll get diabetes at 50, whatever we are or will be, we were then. All we needed was oxygen and food to continue to grow. Look different? Yes, but so did we on our baby picture. And for you young people, how many of you can imagine what you're going to look like as a senior citizen? And yet it'll still be you. All you'll do is mature, develop, grow, and ultimately deteriorate. And that is the story of one unique individual's life. But they say, oh, but there's been life constantly since the primordial ooze. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an individual's life that began at conception and ends at natural death. We are not talking about life in the generic sense. We are talking about individual life.
But still there is question. Some people say, well, that's your definition of human life. That's biologic. But I think differently. What do you mean? Well, some people will say that human life, as they see it, does not begin until the soul is created. Well, that's a dimension of religious faith belief. Hey, we respect that. We have our own beliefs. But if we take an audience in front of us, there'll be some who believe there's a soul, some who don't think there's a soul or a God, and there'll certainly be differences in when they believe the soul is created. What's really important here is that we just don't use that dimension. We don't use religious faith belief as a way of measuring human life in order for the state to determine whether it will protect that life or not. But then there's something that's somewhat similar to it. Philosophic theories as to when the fullness of human life begins. You know, one says, well, this isn't fully human life until there's consciousness, cognition. And someone else says, well, this is not fully human life unless loved by someone else, unless a certain degree of development. Well, what are these? Let's call them philosophic theories as to when the fullness of human life begins. You can't prove a one of them. People of goodwill differ diametrically about them. And any more than we said the state shouldn't use a religious belief to define human life, we do not think the state ought to use somebody's philosophic theory of when human life begins to define it. After all, the state is there to protect the most precious gift that any one of us has, and that's life itself. And if they're going to protect our lives, the state has to know when life begins. So the only way a state can define human life is the one that everyone agrees on. Let's go back to the biology book, The Facts of Science. Open any book anywhere in the world and it all says the same thing. Human life begins at the first cell stage.
But some people would argue and say, oh, but the little one in the womb isn't a person yet. All you can say to that is, define what you mean by person. In our dictionary, it's defined in 14 different ways according to what philosophy or discipline you're talking about. In theology, many would say, well, this wouldn't be a human being unless the soul is created, and yet Jack has already explained that. Maybe we should just look at the medical and the scientific definition of personhood and say when the being is alive and complete, the scientific definition.
And yet there are still doubters, and there shouldn't be. In our time, we've learned a lot through in vitro fertilization. Let's use this as one final example. Here, let's take a dominant genetic trait. In this case, we're going to use skin color. A woman with black skin a man with black skin, sperm and ovum. We fertilize them in the petri dish in the laboratory and plant this tiny new embryonic human in the womb of a woman with white skin. She carries to term and delivers, what does she deliver? She delivers the genetic son of those two black parents. None of her white characteristics rubbed off, so to speak. That proves, what was she? She was but a nutritive blanket wrapped about the babe. But he was a he and a babe from that very beginning. All she did was nurture and protect him. His life began in that dish.
And that brings us to the three basic questions to ask about human life.
Let's ask them. Is this being alive?
Most certainly so, and from the first cell stage.
Is this being human?
How do you know that? 46 human chromosomes in every single cell. The little being can't belong to the rabbit or carrot family. He belongs to the human family.
Is this being complete and intact?
Programmed from within in a marvelous way, each of us are an example of the marvelous story of pregnancy. Our nose is precisely where it belongs because we were an ongoing growth and development until we were delivered, and then we lived as many as 80, 90, how many ever years beyond.
This, then, is human life, and from the beginning. And anyone who denies that is either uninformed or maybe they lie. So we've answered this first question. Yes, this is human life. Now we come to the second one.
And there are only two questions in the entire abortion controversy. The first one, as Jack has said, has been answered. The second one is, and that's the perplexing one, will we protect all humans equally, or will we not?
And if we think just a moment about this, we understand now, since this is a human life, we are now talking about a civil rights issue, a human rights issue. And we make laws to protect civil rights. That is the important thing that we now must say.
And if we don't protect the civil rights, we will continue to have what has happened in the 1980s. Over 1.5 million children were killed every year in abortion, which amounted to over 4,000 babies being destroyed each day. The country must say, will we protect the littlest members of our human family, or will we discriminate against them?
What is the opinion of the people of the United States? Well, right before the Webster case was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court in the spring of 1989, there were a number of major polls by pro-abortion newspapers, New York Times, Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, CBS, and so forth. They asked, for what reasons do which people believe abortion should be legal? And they all basically came to the same conclusion. If you're talking about the life of the mother or a serious threat to her health, you have, a high percent, around 80 or more percent approval. If you're talking about rape and incest, it shades off a little, maybe mid-70s. If you're talking about severe fetal handicap, it's down in the 60s. But then, if you ask, she can't afford a baby, or she has too many children already, how many approve of that? More like 40%. Emotional strain is down into the 30s. She wants to finish school, you're in the high 20 approval. Now she's not married, you're in the low 20s. Want to use it as birth control, you're down in the teens, and approval of abortion for sex selection is about 2 or 3%. Now I've drawn a little line here, and this is important. The reasons why a majority of people approve of abortion are life of the mother and her health, rape, incest, and fetal handicap. The reason why only a minority of people approve of abortion are the social and economic reasons.
And therefore, as you can see, the majority of people oppose the majority of abortions. The only ones that the majority of people approve of are that very narrow group that are called the hard or the difficult cases, but those are indeed very, very few abortions.
Now, one of the major things thrown at the pro-life movement is this whole business of coat hanger. If you again forbid abortion, we'll go to the back alleys, there'll be butcher shops and all that sort of stuff. How do we answer that? Well, remember what their claims are now. Their claims are that there were huge numbers of illegal abortions, they were all very dangerous, and all these women died. Let's look at the actual facts. These are official government statistics, and we've made a graph of this. We have to go back before World War II to find more than 1,000 women a year dying from abortion, and by the time we're entering the 1950s, it had dropped to around 250. Sort of bumped along through the 50s, and then it began a steady downhill trend. Now, this line here is when the first state legalized abortion, and you see it had fallen from roughly 250 to about half of that before the first state even legalized abortion. Why? Better antibiotics, intensive care units, better surgery, all the miracles of modern medicine. Okay, then the states began to legalize abortion. We got to 1972 here, 3, and now the Supreme Court legalizes it completely. You notice the steady downhill trend that had been established before legalization continues right through legalization, and when it's legal, it doesn't seem to affect it at all. It keeps going down steadily. Let's look at the actual numbers here. 1960, all states still illegal, 289 deaths. 1966, the year before the first state legalizes, it's down to 120. 1972, pro-abortion people at that time were claiming 5,000 to 10,000 women a year dying from illegal abortions. The official government figures show only 39. And 26 more died from legal abortions. 39 deaths, each one a tragedy, but less than 1 death per state per year. In the face of over 5 million total pregnancies, they claimed there were huge numbers of illegal abortions, all very dangerous, and yet almost no women died. They can't have it both ways. Either there weren't many illegal abortions, or they were all very safe. And I'm not sure they were all very safe, and therefore, there can't have been many illegal abortions, and certainly it was rare for a woman to die. This entire coat hanger propaganda of theirs is a total fabrication. It literally never happened. They shouldn't keep saying it. It's simply not true.
And yet you hear people say, well, I wouldn't have an abortion, but I think the woman ought to have the right to choose. She ought to be able to do what she wants with her own body. Let's look very carefully. What are they talking about? Once you're pregnant, there's another little one. There's a second patient there. There's 2 now. That little baby in there, what's your choice? The only choice you have is how will the little baby come out? Will the little baby hopefully come out alive and healthy, or will the little baby come out in pieces? What we're offering women today is the right to choose to kill, which is not an answer to any woman's problem ever.
A dramatic example of choice occurred right before the Civil War. The U.S. Supreme Court decided the Dred Scott case, and by a 7-2 margin they ruled that black people were not legal persons, that they had no civil rights, that they in fact were the property of the owner who had the right to buy or sell or even kill. Now the abolitionists protested, but none other than the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in effect said this. He said, now look, you oppose slavery? You find it morally offensive? That's all right. You don't have to own a slave. But don't force your morality on the slave owner. He now has the constitutionally protected right to choose to own a slave. Now get off his back. Well, gee, about 100 years later, in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Roe versus Wade decision, again a 7-2. This time they said unborn people are not legal persons. They have no civil or human rights. They are now the property of the owner, the mother, who has the right to keep or to kill. And we protested. And what did we hear? Now look, if you're opposed to abortion, that's all right. You find it morally offensive? That's your privilege. But look, you don't have to have one. But don't force your morality on the owner, the woman. For she now has the constitutionally protected right to choose to kill. Abortion is legal. Now get off her back. That analogy so fascinated me that a few years ago I wrote a little book called Abortion and Slavery, History Repeats. Some of you might be interested.
And what we really should be looking at and thinking about is that the mother should have choice. Choice so that both she and her baby can live. We need to be her support system. We need to offer her the things that she needs. The opportunity for a job, better housing, good education, health care, whatever it is that she needs, we need to be there to help her find those things. Probably the best thing that's happened in the pro-life movement, the silver lining to the ugly, evil cloud of abortion, has been the formation of the help centers for women. While half of the movement is involved in education, legislation, and lobbying, the other half, and maybe more, goes into helping pregnant women. There are all kinds of centers now around our country that the only question they ask the pregnant woman is, what can I do for you? Do you need a pregnancy test? Do you need to be referred to a doctor that'll care for you? What do you need? And that's where we need to be today, helping the women so that they both can live, mother and baby.
In this segment, Dr. and Mrs. Willke pose and answer the balance of the major pro-abortion arguments, and then show and tell the story of abortion itself. Now, Dr. and Mrs. Willke.
Abortion. Basically, two questions, two answers. The first one, what is this that grows within? We've spoken to that. This is clearly, absolutely human life from the first cell stage. The second, should we protect? Well, involved in those protections are some questions that need answers. And I think it's time, let's get on with perhaps the first of those.
Every child a wanted child, and if not wanted, kill. What a ghastly ethic that says someone else has to want us in order for us to continue to live. But even if that kind of ethic prevailed, does it really answer the problem of unwanted pregnancies? Look a little further. In every sociological study, valid study in the world's literature, the same conclusion has come. Unwanted pregnancy is no predictor of how you'll feel about the baby after the little one's here in your arms. You take a group of women who were unable to get abortions. You take a group of women who were just happy to be pregnant. Follow them out for a few years after the babies are born. What will you find? You will find the same number of dearly wanted children and the same number of unwanted children in both groups. How you feel in the beginning doesn't say how you'll feel later on. But even go a little further, then they say, but all these unwanted children are going to produce all these battered children. Is that true? Dr. Edward Lanowski, the world's famous researcher on battered children, studied 600 battered children and their families, and to his utter amazement, he found that over 90% of battered children were wanted and planned pregnancies, way above the national norm. He found that the mothers wore maternity clothes 3 to 4 months earlier than other pregnant women in the population. He found that the fathers named the sons after themselves 2 to 3 times more often. They were just so pleased to be having a son. Then why the battering? We don't fully understand the sick psychology involved with the parents who battered children. One thing we do know, many of them were battered as children themselves. The other thing we do know is that unwanted children are not a large part at all of that problem.
Assault rape pregnancies. Well, obviously, Whenever we discuss abortion, that always comes up rather quickly. I think very central to this, first of all, to admit, of course, that every assault, rape, pregnancy is a profound tragedy. All right, let's move from that. The U.S. Justice Department reports that there are 100,000 assault rapes in the United States every year. Now, there are approximately 100 million women who are old enough to be at risk for rape. Now, if you cancel that fraction down, you come to 1 rape per 1,000 women per year. If we take the figure of for every 1,000 women raped, there is only 1 pregnancy, and that's sustainable, that's provable, then we see that there are only 100 assault rape pregnancies in the whole United States in a year. How many get aborted? Only half. In today's climate, only half of those women elect abortion. And if you ask them, and there have been studies on this, what is your chief complaint? Well, you'd think, well, because she's pregnant. Oh, no, no, no. Their chief complaint is how others treated her. Now, if instead of the, the cynicism, the jokes about her, the ignoring of her, the, oh, she had a skirt that was too short, all of this obscene stuff, if instead of that, we came to her, put our arm on her shoulder, and said, Mary Jo, we understand. It wasn't your fault. I know what you've been through. Let us help you. What can we do? No, we're not going to condemn you. Now, if that is the way she was treated, then a lot less than half would choose abortion. And so where are we then with the rape thing? Well, I'm sure there are plenty of politicians out there that may want to put that exception in our new laws. But I must remind you, an innocent baby was conceived who didn't ask to come. Do we punish other criminals for crimes by killing their children? Should we in this case kill an innocent baby for the crime of his father? I think not.
But what if you knew ahead of time that that little baby was going to be, as they say, horribly deformed, which means that he would be disabled or handicapped? Take a look. Before birth or after birth, you have the same patient with the same handicap. Let's look a little further. Here's a little baby with spina bifida. We now know that if you do surgery very early, within the first 24 hours, you have a much better chance for a good result. Here the little one is repaired, and hopefully a good result. Here's another little one, much higher, much greater chance now of having a severe handicap, such as quadriplegic. Fortunately, the little one was operated on early, and here he is, the first little boy, running there and happy. We need to stop and think, what is discriminating for handicap? It's killing your patient to cure the disease. I think that's not a human answer. Rather, we should say, little one, if you have a handicap, then we'll work with you. We'll love you, and we'll make your life as wonderful as we can within the limits that you can live.
Discriminating by age, that's another way that we do it. If you live in France, your life is protected after 10 weeks, in Denmark after 12. In Sweden, it's 20. New York's law was 24. England's still is 28. In the United States, under Roe versus Wade, the limit was at birth. Now, you might look at this for a moment and say, my goodness, all those people, all those nations, they sure can't get their act together. They don't agree? No, they all agree. They all agree that you can discriminate fatally against an entire class of people on the basis of age. They just disagree upon which age. All right, let's look at the United States Census. Here we have the obvious, and that is that the total population is still growing. However, you note that the rate of growth is tapering off. Okay, let's break that into age cohorts, and let's see where this is. In the 25 to 44 age bracket, there's a little over 60 million people. In the 45 to 64 bracket, there's about 44 million people. Over 65, about 25 million. Well, it's pretty obvious that those in the two younger bars there are active, busy, working, and paying taxes. The ones over 65 are retired and drawing benefits. Well, just take a quick glance and you'll see that there's about 4 people working for every one retired. But let's jump ahead a little. Let's jump now to 2020 and extend these lines on the basis of the present birth rate, death rate, and immigration rate. We still have around 60-some million people in that youngest age group. We have 75 million almost now in the middle group. But the retired group is now over 60 million. In other words, now we have only about 2 people working and paying taxes for every one who's retired. Here we go. In 1980, we had 3.5 workers paying taxes for every person drawing Social Security. By the year 2000, it'll be 3. By the year 2020, it'll be down to 2.1. And if the same birth and death rate and so forth continues, by the year 2040, it'll be 1.5. Now, why this drop in younger people? Very simple. A nation grows or dies by its birth rate. The average woman, in order to maintain a level population, must have 2.1 babies in her fertile lifetime. That's what we call ZPG, zero population growth. If there's more than that, the nation grows. If there's less, the nation dies. The United States has been below 1.8 since 1972. Today, there are about 9 people dying per 1,000 per year, roughly 14 being born. But tomorrow, with twice as many people in that older bracket, there'll be closer to 20 dying. No sign that there'll be any more than that born. So today, we're still having a few more born than are dying. We're counting immigration now. Tomorrow, we'll have more die than are born. And we're going to have a tremendous overload of old people, and almost no one down there to pay taxes for their Social Security. The answer? I'm afraid it's going to be euthanasia. We already have decided that we can kill off an entire age group because they're too young in age. Perhaps tomorrow we'll start killing off another age group because they're too old in age.
What we are going to see in the days ahead are that we will use every reason that we use to kill the unborn child, we will use to kill the elderly and the disabled in our society. And we will use the same reasons. Today it was age. They were too young. Tomorrow it'll be they're too old. Wantedness. The baby was unwanted. Tomorrow the elderly person will be unwanted. Place of residence. Today it was in the womb. Tomorrow it'll be in the nursing home. Intelligence. The baby wasn't yet conscious. The elderly person is no longer conscious. Cost. The mother's too poor to have another baby. The old folks, there's too many of them for us to care for. Degree of perfection. The baby was going to be handicapped. How many disabled people are there among us? Numbers. That mother already had too many children. There's too many old folks coming into the culture now. Marital status. The mother wasn't married. She shouldn't have a baby. Tomorrow Aunt Susie's a widow. Usefulness. The baby was going to be a burden. That handicapped child is a severe burden. Meaningful life. Remember that the abortion decision said the baby had not yet reached meaningful life. All of our so-called euthanasia bills that are classed under living will, death with dignity, all say when the patient no longer has meaningful life. Our challenge to you would be, as we look here and see 2 ladies, 100 years separates these two. Would you work as hard to save each of their lives as you would your own?
Discrimination against an entire class of living people on the basis of race.
Here we see one gas chamber's load of Jews. The next stop, the incinerator. This was taken at Belsen, 1945.
Post-abortion syndrome. Now that's a word that you're going to become more and more familiar with. Not too many years ago, people were saying it didn't exist. Now, there's no longer a question about it existing. We've described it. We know a great deal about it. We still don't know how often it happens. There's a lot we yet must learn. What is post-abortion syndrome? Well, remember now, when the girl gets the abortion, she's been told by her mother, her boyfriend, the lady at the clinic, the abortionist, she's been told this isn't going to bother her. So she tells herself, this isn't going to bother me. And I presume for some it doesn't bother them too much. A few get into trouble right away. They start to have vivid dreams. They recall this. They can't drive past the abortion place. They turn on their carpet sweeper and it reminds us of the suction machine. Some of them get into trouble early, but not too many. For most, there's a feeling of relief. It's over. I'm out of the box. And then time goes on. Things begin to happen. Often some very negative things in her life. Drink, drugs, particularly problems with her boyfriend. Most of them break up, or her husband. Too often that breaks up too. And then she has other problems. She may have physical headaches, things of this sort. Very commonly, they do not tie it to the previous abortion. They keep suppressing it. The hallmark of post-abortion syndrome is suppression, denial. No, I don't care if I can't get off the drugs. They wouldn't even think of the abortion causing it. Sooner or later, the hurt comes to enough of a level that she has to come for help. Tragically, few psychiatrists really see this today. But now we know how to cure it. We first of all have to interview this lady and find out for sure where it is. Then, 1, she must admit that she was part of killing her own baby. 2, she then must grieve, tears, like for a lost child. 3, then find some type of divine forgiveness. That's almost 100%. However she sees or senses this. Finally, forgive herself. There is a way of helping. What if you're hurting?
The wonderful thing that we're seeing are the multiplication of groups of women to help other women who've had abortion. They're called many things. Women exploited by abortion, Open Arms, Rachel, American Victims of Abortion. This is one of the fastest growing parts of the pro-life movement. Women who've had an abortion and now reach out to help others who are hurting and need the healing. We would commend them to you if you know anyone that needs this kind of service. Also, of course, there are the multiplicity of the caring centers that are called pregnancy problem centers, crisis pregnancy centers, heartbeat, birthright. Those are the groups that will help a pregnant woman who's distressed, has problems, and needs help. Those groups are available in your cities or in a city near you. And finally, as we look at it, we say, but should we impose our morality on the mother? Rather say it the way it is. How much longer will we allow abortionists and mothers to impose their morality fatally on their tiny unborn child?
The use of accurate photos of abortion is crucial to a full understanding of abortion. Viewer discretion, however, is advised.
Abortion. Fatal discrimination on the basis of being too young and place of residence, living in the womb. There's a time and a place to hear about and to look at what abortion really is. But should we use pictures?
Many people say, oh, you're going to show those gross, emotional, awful pictures. Do we do that in trying to explain other issues? Yes, here are little children from Ethiopia, tragic little children. We heard a lot and read a lot, but not much happened until the media began to show us the pictures. And once we saw the pictures, then people became concerned and became active. The same is true with abortion. Every American should see these slides at least once so they understand what abortion really is.
And so, let's look at abortion. Let's start with a very early one. This is an abortion, a suction abortion done at about 6 weeks. She's just about to miss her second menstrual period. Now, Here is what's inserted into that lady from below. This is a flexible plastic tube. It's inserted into her womb. Now this is sort of a knife-like cutting edge right here. The powerful suction tears this little fragile body to bits, and it is drawn out through the catheter. This next picture here shows you what's left after a suction abortion. This is an abortion done at about 8 weeks.
This is an abortion done at 10 weeks. This is the thumb forceps for size. It's also a suction abortion when the little baby is ripped apart.
Here is another abortion done at 10 weeks. This is a Canadian quarter here for size, the same size as an American quarter. What happened here was that only the soft parts were sucked away and the big pieces didn't come out. The abortionist, luckily, noticed that, had to stretch open the womb further, reach in with a different kind of an instrument, and take out the 2 big pieces. So there we had it at about 8 to 10 weeks. Barbara showed you at 10. Here's one at 12. This is called a D&C, dilatation and curettage. Now the method here is a little bit different. Here the abortionist uses a loop-shaped steel knife. This is called a curette, and this is sharp. And with this, he scrapes and cuts the afterbirth away from the inner lining of the womb and slices the baby's body into pieces to draw it out. At 14 weeks, we have a D&E, dilatation and evacuation. Stretching the womb wider open, the abortionist goes in with a pliers-like instrument, no anesthetic for the baby, reaches in and grabs some part of this living child and simply tears it off, a leg or whatever. Live, snapping the spine, bringing it out, and then another instrument to crush the skull. What you see on the picture is the nurse who has reassembled the parts to be sure that the womb is empty.
Does this cause the woman problems? Yes, there are problems for some women.
Immediate physical complications include bleeding from 1 to 10%, perforation, cutting a hole through the wall of the womb, causing peritonitis and occasional death, and infection, enough to need an antibiotic. This ranges from 5 to 25%.
But the most feared long-term complication is permanent sterility. This number varies widely depending upon whether the reporting is from a university medical center or from a freestanding abortion facility where the complication rate is sharply higher. The figures range plus or minus 5%. Those women later in life will have to sadly say, "I killed the only baby I ever bore."
The most common problem is damage to the cervix, the mouth of the womb. An 18-year-old woman who gets an early abortion has a long, firm, tubular cervix that the abortionist stretches open in 30 to 60 seconds, and in doing so invariably tears some of its muscle fibers. Such a weakened cervix is the primary cause for a doubling of the miscarriage rate, a tripling of the number of premature babies born, and a doubling of the number of babies dying after birth.
Jack has shown you that loop-shaped steel knife and the sharp-edged plastic curette that are used to scrape and slice away the afterbirth from the inner lining of the womb. If the abortionist cuts too deeply, the lining will regenerate with scar. This can produce future menstrual disturbances, adhesions within the womb, delivery problems such as retained placenta, and if the scar partly closes over the opening to the tube, you have the setup for a tubal pregnancy.
Another problem is from blood transfusions. These can cause hepatitis, which can cause death.
Most of these long-term problems are never reported as having been caused by abortion. In fact, for hepatitis and delivery problems, they're often not even thought of.
Now, let's look at this next baby. This is a prostaglandin baby at about 4 months. What happens here is the injection of a drug made by the Upjohn Company that causes powerful contractions and labor and expelling of whatever size baby she carries. This little one was killed in the process, a dead prostaglandin baby at about 4 months. This next one now is called a salt poisoning abortion. You get a feel here for size. There's a 2-centimeter ruler on one side. Let's come up a little closer and look at these legs, and then let's take a look at the head. What you see is that the skin has been scalded away from part of the head. The next picture shows you a little more detail on that of the baby's hand. And you see that the skin has been burned and stripped away. We don't know if this happens before or after the baby dies. Here's another picture of a salt poisoning abortion. This one just shy of 4.5 months. Again, after the mother has the salt injection, the baby breathes and swallows it in, tends to convulse before the baby dies. She goes into labor and expels a baby, as you see here. Here we have a pile of dead babies from one hospital, one day's work. The largest little girl on the right there was 7 months, weighed 3.5 pounds. And for just a moment, of an abortion is what we call a hysterotomy or mini cesarean section. Here we have the incision in the mother's abdomen. The afterbirth is still in there. Here's the umbilical cord. Here's a little 2-pound girl who's being held up by the surgeon by an arm and a leg, and these clamps are about to cut the cord. Little 2-pounder nowadays has a good chance of surviving, let's say at least perhaps 1 in 3. Not this one. She had a contract on her head. The abortionist threw her in the basin, face down, smothered her, and after that, she went to the pathology lab.
And maybe this is what we're talking about. Just so much human garbage. These little babies had reached fetal ages of 18 to 24 weeks before being killed by abortion. Each specimen came to the laboratory. The pathologist examined the specimen under the running water, recorded its identity. At the end of the day, the garbage went to the incinerator.
And so that is abortion, friends. Abortion kills a baby. Yes, we know that mothers have problems, many times serious problems. Our question is, can we solve her problem by the ghastly violence of killing an innocent child? We think not. We must find other solutions for her. We don't know all those solutions. They've got to be out there. They must. We simply cannot kill innocent babies to solve the social problems of women. Now, how do we accomplish this in a civilized, democratic society?
We look to how abortion came to us. Abortion came through the law. Lawmakers make laws and appoint judges. We elect the lawmakers. Therefore, until we are concerned enough about this carnage and are willing to do something about it, those laws will continue to be there, and we need to elect the kind of people that will have the courage and the strength to change the laws so that our tiniest little brethren are protected.